1 Samuel chapter 26, verse 1. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, "Is not David hiding himself on the hill of Hachilah, which is on the east of Jeshimon?" So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is beside the road on the east of Jeshimon. But David remained in the wilderness. When he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies and learned that Saul had indeed come. Then David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay, with Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was lying within the encampment, while the army was encamped around him. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Joab's brother Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, "Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul?" And Abishai said, "I will go down with you." So David and Abishai went to the army by night. And there lay Saul, sleeping within the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head, and Abner and the army lay around him. Then Abishai said to David, "God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now, please, let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice." Earlier this week, I was, for reasons not my own, I'm fine, but reasons of research for somebody else, found myself on a website that had 6 signs of nutrient deficiency. And I kid you not, sign number 1 was severe hair loss. What's so funny? That's actually a sign of iron deficiency. Burning sensation in the feet or tongue, sign of B12 deficiency. Wounds are slow to heal. Need more vitamin C. Bone pain, vitamin D deficiency. And it reminded me of a time in my life where I was going through a crisis. Anybody else here been in a crisis? And I needed help. Anybody else bold enough to say they need help? And I had a guy who was really good at helping people help me. He was really, really good at identifying symptoms and correlating them with deficiencies in my life. And as we talked about my story, one of the things that I kind of held with a measure of pride, to be honest with you. I thought it was something to be touted. I didn't see it as a flaw, I saw it as a feature. Was something that I made sound like a holy thing, even though it wasn't, by calling it eye for an eye rejection. You hang up on me, the conversation is over. I'm not calling you back, and I'm not answering if you call back. that surfaced out of a time in my life where I was in high school and had a girlfriend and got rejected in a pretty brutal way. Relationship over. Eye for an eye. Rejection. This very skilled counselor was able to say, Phil, those are symptoms of a mercy deficiency. David has already been very merciful to Saul. That spear that's sticking out of the ground next to Saul's head, Saul's tried to pin David to the wall with it 3 times and tried to pin Saul's son Jonathan, David's best friend, to the wall 1 time on David's behalf. And 2 weeks ago, we saw a text where Saul went into a cave and he didn't know David was there. And David got close enough that he was able to cut a corner of Saul's robe off. And David's men were like, don't cut his robe, cut his throat. He's trying to kill you. And David showed him mercy. And the question is today, will David show him mercy upon mercy? Look with me again at verse 1. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, Is not David hiding himself on the hill of Hachilah, which is on the east of Jeshimon? So Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph with 3,000 chosen men of Israel to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. This is par for the course with Saul. First of all, the last time Saul and David talked, Saul said to David, I'm not going to put out my hand against you again. You're supposed to be the king. He acknowledged it. And here he is. As soon as somebody gives him the whereabouts for David, he's like, rally the troops. And he doesn't wait. He doesn't investigate. He doesn't ask for volunteers. Notice that it says 3,000 chosen men of Israel. Saul chose them. This is one of Saul's fatal flaws. He's ready, fire, aim. He's always ready to pull the trigger. Do you think that that makes David feel more or less secure? A little bit less secure, right? Verse 3, And Saul encamped on the hill of Hachilah, which is beside the road on the east of Jeshimon. But David, what's the next word? Remained. Well, what's the next word? Remained. One more time. Remained. David remained. Just want to make sure. There were a few of you who weren't looking at the book. You were looking at me. What I say doesn't matter as much as what's in the book. So please have your eyes on the book. But David remained in the wilderness. So does David jump right to it like Saul does? No. When he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness, David sent out spies, does some investigation, a non-military move first. He wants to know what's going on, wants to know what's up, and learned that Saul had indeed come. Then David rose and came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay. This is probably from a distance. I don't know if you can see Saul coming and going from a tent or a particular spot. The text doesn't say, but he can see without being in the camp. There's Saul's spot. My guess is it wasn't near the perimeter of 3,000 guys. It was in the heart of it. Saul's a little bit unhinged, but he's not stupid. David saw the place where Saul lay with Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Saul was lying within the encampment while the army was encamped around him. I read one piece of commentary this week. This is a little bit speculative. So the text doesn't say. Everybody say the text doesn't say. So the text doesn't say exactly, but it's a little bit speculative that this is actually a pretty paranoid move on Saul's part. If there is a strike against the camp, and Saul, the king, and Abner, the leader of the military, are in the same place, that might be good for Saul to have the most skilled man next to him for his protection, but it's not what's best for the 3,000 guys they brought. Right. Because if they both get hit, if they both get taken out, now there's not a leader. A little bit paranoid, possibly. Possibly. Then David said to Ahimelech the Hittite and Joab's brother Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Who will go down with me into the camp to Saul? Now that's distinctly different than the move that Saul made. Saul chose. And David chose who he asked. David's still being selective, but this is not compulsory. Who wants to go? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. So David and Abishai went to the army by what? By what? By night. You guys okay? Okay, all right. Here we go. So David and Abishai went to the army by night. There we go. And there lay Saul sleeping, is what we talked about earlier, within the encampment, with his spear stuck in the ground at his head. And Abner and the army lay around him. Verse 8, then Abishai, this is, by the way, very similar to the message that David heard when he was in the cave and he spared Saul's life. His men at that point were like, why don't you kill him? They actually said this, the Lord has given him into your hand. Verse 8, then Abishai said to David, God has given your enemy into your hand this day. Now please let me pin him to the earth with one stroke of the spear, and I will not strike him twice. Now, I don't think Abishai was just talking a big game here. I think he is extremely skilled at what he's proposing he can do. That's quite a statement, isn't it? Hey, David, I'm not going to have to hit him twice. It'll be over. We know from Scripture, David was a poet. I've been accused of being a little bit of a poetic kind of a guy. And it was said as an accusation. I got to tell you, as a poet, there's something real poetic about Saul, the guy who throws spears, dying by his own spear. I can just see how this would be so easy for David to justify. It would be a poetic end to Saul. You could even co-opt a passage for it. Hey, you live by the spear, die by the spear. Verse 9. But David said to Abishai, do not destroy him. Why? Because he doesn't deserve it? No. For who can put out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Hey, don't do that. But not because of what it's going to do to Saul. Don't do that because of what it's going to do to you. You won't be guiltless if you do this. Saul was anointed king by the Lord. Verse 10. And David said, as the Lord lives, the Lord will strike him. Or his day will come to die. Or he will go down into battle and perish. David's not saying Saul needs to live. He's saying that decision belongs to the Lord. And not only does that decision belong to the Lord, but how it happens belongs to the Lord. Last week, we saw a story about David and Nabal and Abigail. And in that story, we saw David come to the right conclusion about the fact that Nabal was standing not only against David, but he was standing against God, and he was standing against God's purposes in and through David. And he had to go. But Abigail comes and intercedes for Nabal and says, don't do this. Don't take your salvation into your own hand. Don't bring blood guilt upon yourself. And what we saw was that David was coming to the right conclusion, but he was coming to it the wrong way. And God was gracious to interrupt. And it seems like maybe David has learned his lesson, while Saul hasn't. David has learned his lesson that not only whether this happens is up to the Lord, but how it happens is up to the Lord. And this isn't the point of the message, but I wonder if there is someone in here and you are walking through something right now and you need to have the faith that David has in this passage. That not only is God going to determine whether that thing happens in your life, He's going to determine how it happens. And you interjecting isn't going to change the fact that God determines how it happens. It'll just determine whether you're okay with the fact. that God determines how it happens. Verse 11, David continues, "The Lord forbid that I should put my hand against the Lord's anointed. But take now the spear that is at his head and the jar of water, and let us go." Now, if David doesn't want Saul to die, he must have a lot of confidence in Abishai, who just said, "I can grab that spear and I'll only have to hit him once." And David goes, "Go ahead and grab the spear, grab the water, and let's go." If I were Abishai, I'd be like, it'd be a shame if, as I was picking up the spear, I'm clumsy sometimes, you know. David must have a lot of confidence that Abishai is going to follow his lead to let him pick that spear up. Verse 12, so David took the spear and the jar of water from Saul's head, and they went away. No man saw it or knew it, nor did any awake, for they were all, what? Asleep. And why were they asleep? Because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon them. I love that our author waits until they're out to tell us, by the way, the reason that they didn't get run through 40 times on their way out was because God was keeping their enemies at bay. We've got some baptisms here this morning. And I got to tell you, it never ceases to amaze me how many angles of approach our enemy will take against people who are in the process of getting baptized. It's one of the things that we pray for as we meet with people and prepare them for baptism. You just need to know the enemy hates this. And all three people that are supposed to get baptized are here this morning. Amen. And some, so stoked. Let me just tell you, whether you knew it or not, the Lord was keeping the enemy at bay to bring you here to this place this morning. Verse 13, then David went over to the other side and stood far off from the top of the hill with a great space between them. And David called to the army. Oh, man. Yeah. David called to the army and to Abner, the son of Ner, saying, "Will you not answer, Abner?" Then Abner answered, "Who are you who calls to the king?" And David said to Abner, "Are you not a man? Who is like you in Israel? Why then have you kept watch over your lord the king? For one of the people came in to destroy the king, your lord. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you have not kept watch over your Lord, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is, and the jar of water that was at his head." That's quite a magic trick. Hey, all that stuff that was in your tent, it's over here now. Maybe Really, that taunt is, maybe the king should find somebody who doesn't sleep so deep to guard him. Verse 17, Saul recognized David's voice and said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" And David said, "It is my voice, my Lord." That's lowercase Lord. It's a term for master. "My Lord, O king." And he said, "Why does my Lord pursue after his servant? For what have I done? What evil is on my hands? Now, therefore, let my Lord the king hear the words of his servant. If it is the Lord who has stirred you up against me, may he accept an offering. But if it is men, may they be cursed before the Lord. For they have driven me out this day, that I should have no share in the heritage of the Lord, saying, 'Go serve other gods.' Now, therefore, let not my blood fall to the earth away from the presence of the Lord." He's talking there about getting back into the holy place. "For the king of Israel has come out to seek a single flea, like one who hunts a partridge in the mountains." He's chiseling away at Saul's motive, Saul's motivation. Who led you to do this, Saul? If it's the Lord, let me offer a sacrifice and get that taken care of. But if it's the words of men whispered into your ears that somehow I've done something against you or I've done something wrong to you, you just need to know that I've now had 2 chances to kill you, 2 chances to betray you. And I haven't done it. And here you are with 3,000 men hunting a bird. All this effort for this little tiny thing. All this effort to kill a flea. I wonder if Saul can see the mercy. Can Saul see the tireless mercy of David? Verse 21, "Then Saul said, 'I have sinned.'" Okay, just real quick. I know that might seem encouraging if you weren't here 2 weeks ago. But if you were here 2 weeks ago, you know this is the same speech Saul gave the last time David spared his life. We've seen in this passage already that David has the mercy not to kill Saul when he has the opportunity. Does he have the mercy to let Saul lie to his face? "I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm. Because my life was precious in your eyes this day." There is Saul's motive exposed. Remember I told you? He's like, "Why are you doing this, Saul? Is it because the Lord told you? Is it because men told you?" And now Saul is at least feigning mercy to David. But the reason that he cites for showing David mercy is because David has shown him mercy. The reason for David showing mercy to Saul is that Saul is the Lord's anointed. And I personally believe that by this time, Saul knows that David has been anointed his successor. But Saul doesn't say that's his reason for not harming David. Do you see where I'm getting that? He says, I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly and have made a great mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was sin. Man, so often, I've done it too. Maybe you guys won't leave me alone on this, that things that are sinful, I say things like, I'm struggling. When I'm not struggling, I'm just giving myself to it. Or I say, I could have done that better. When what I did was sinful. Or I have made a great mistake. Verse 22, and David answered and said, here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and take it. How many of you want to be that guy? Verse 23, the Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. The Lord gave you into my hand today, and I would not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight. And here David exposes his motivation. So may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, that he may deliver me out of all tribulation. That is so counterintuitive to the way writing normally goes. The normal way to write that would have been like, just as your life is precious in my sight, I hope my life is precious in your sight. But he says, no, just as your life is precious in my sight, I want my life to be precious in God's sight, because he can protect me better than you. Verse 25, then Saul said to David, blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things. Oh, he's not wrong. And will succeed in them. Oh, he's not wrong. So David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. God, really for the last 3 chapters, has been treating David's mercy deficiency. What's the vitamin you use to treat a mercy deficiency? Repetition. Repetition. In fact, if we're going to take nothing else from this text today, if you walk away with nothing else other than this one idea, let it be this. Tireless mercy toward our enemies points us toward a tireless God. Tireless mercy toward our enemies points us toward a tireless God. We've got some guests in here for baptisms at the end of our service, and I just got to tell you, I know I can confidently say this on behalf of our entire church family, how honored we are that you're here this morning. And it could be that this is your first time worshiping with our church. It could be that this is your first time worshiping with any church. Or it could be that you're an old timer. You're a vet. You've been here a long time. Don't believe the lie that you can outrun God's mercy. No matter what you've done, you got to know that you've been running from a God who is tireless. And when you're out of breath, and you turn around to square up with him, he's like in between sips of something. Hey. You cannot outrun him. Not with speed and not with stamina. He's a tireless God. Actually, originally in my big idea, I had tireless mercy toward our enemies points them toward a tireless God. But then I realized that is not what's happening in this text. God is using David's mercy toward Saul to tell David something about who God is. So let your mercy shown toward that person who has tried to take you out. And maybe they haven't tried to take you out with a spear, but they've tried to take you out emotionally, professionally, with your reputation. And let your mercy toward that person, motivated not by how they've treated you, but how God has treated you. Right. Let your mercy toward that person, motivated by how God has treated you, point your vision again to a God who stops at nothing to show you mercy upon mercy. Mercy is a little bit different than grace. Grace is being given what you do not deserve. Mercy is not being given what you do deserve. Do you know the mercy that has been shown to you? Can I tell you about it? The gospel is the good news that while we were still sinners, while there was nothing worth saving about us, Jesus was born, he died on the cross, he rose from the dead, he went to heaven, and he's coming back again. Right. And when he was dying on that cross, he looked out upon his enemies. The people who decided, who schemed, who worked hard to take him out. And he looked upon them while he was dying, and he said, Father, speaking to God the Father, God the Son speaking to God the Father, Father, forgive them. They do not know what they do. And that's us. My sin put Jesus on that cross. Your sin put Jesus on that cross. We were his enemies. And his tireless mercy toward us points us to his tireless Father. Because when Jesus prayed that prayer, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they do, the Father in heaven wasn't like, fine, I guess. Because in that moment, Jesus was representing the heart of a father who stops at nothing to show his enduring, tireless mercy. But you can see there is a day where Jesus is coming back, where the opportunity to surrender to his grace, his mercy, and his forgiveness will be over. And the Bible says that on that day, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of the Father. And so the question is, will you surrender? Will you believe and confess today? Or will you wait until it's too late? Romans 10:9 says it this way: if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Right. We're about to hear testimonies of that. The intersection of belief and confession. That's the moment that God looks and no longer sees you for all of the struggles, mistakes, wanderings you've done. He no longer sees you for your sin. He sees you in light of his Son's perfect righteousness.